We are less than 2 weeks away from the November election, which means there is probably a lot of people out there that are starting to feel the dread of this election anxiety. And while it is so easy to focus all of our criticisms on all of the bad things that Donald Trump represents, I think it's also important that we keep on pointing out that we have a positive option in this race. Somebody like Kamala Harris has spent her life in public service, whether you're talking about her being a prosecutor, a district attorney, an attorney general. She was elected as senator, then she was elected as vice president. Kamala Harris knows what it means to serve other people. And so we cannot lose sight of that as we race towards this election. So I wanted to take a look at another one of these interviews that Kamala Harris just recently sat down for and just kind of point out, at least we have a candidate on the other side who is competent, who has policy ideas, and has the values that many Americans hold. So let's go ahead and kick things off by looking at her first answer, where she gives a lot of her different flagship policy ideas.
I am very clear, cost of groceries still too high. The voters know it, I know it. So part of my plan includes what we need to do to bring down the price of groceries, including the work I will do dealing with price gouging, something I dealt with when I was Attorney General, something I will deal with going forward. Cost of housing. You know, I'm speaking with people of every background in every area of the country, of every age. And, you know, the idea of the American dream was something that previous generations could count on, not as much anymore. Bringing down the cost of housing by doing what I have done in my career that perhaps is a different approach, which is really actively working with the private sector, for example, home builders, to create incentives for them to build millions of new homes in housing units so we can bring down the cost, including what I will do to give people a $25,000 down payment assistance if they are a first-time home buyer. So these are examples. The example is what I'm going to do to expand the child tax credit because, listen, young parents in particular, they need help. They have a natural desire to parent their children well, but not always the resources. $6,000 extra during the first year of their child's life can help them buy a crib or a car seat or clothes, the things that are so crucial to that phase of their child's development. So my plans and my policies are really directed at exactly your point.
So I know there was a lot there, but we have to remember that these are tangible policy ideas that would actually help many Americans. And if we compare that to somebody like Donald Trump, what types of policies is he actually fighting for? Besides mass deportations and across-the-board tariffs that would hurt American consumers. Now, you may not agree with Kamala Harris on every single policy. In fact, I wouldn't expect you to. But she is clearly the more competent individual in this race, and she is fighting for policies that she can actually articulate. And I think that that is such a world of difference when we compare her to somebody like Donald Trump, who rambles and rambles and rambles, talks about electrocution and sharks and Hannibal Lecter. Kamala Harris can sit down, she can take these questions, and she can give coherent answers to them. And I know that is a very low bar, but it's important to remind people that she is the positive option for the 2024 race. But let's go ahead and move on to this question that we haven't really heard a lot of this election cycle, and that is America ready for a black woman president?
Let me ask you about something that you said when you were running for president the last time around, back in 2019. At the time, you said that the elephant in the room was whether the country was ready for a woman and a woman of color to be president. So let me ask you, as you sit here today, do you think the country is ready now for a woman and a woman of color to be president?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I am saying that in terms of every walk of life of our country. You know, I think part of what is important in this election is really not only turning the page, but closing the page and the chapter on an era that suggests that Americans are divided. What I know from personal experience, from lived experience, and from my travels even most recently, the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And what the American people want in their president is a president for all Americans, which is the type and kind of president I pledge to be.
Now, I really like this answer for a couple of different reasons. First off, she's talking about being president for all Americans. That is such an important pledge and should be like a non-starter for anybody who wants to hold the office of the president. Kamala Harris understands that she is going to be governing for people that vehemently disagree with her. And that's okay. But she understands the responsibility as president to be looking out for all Americans. And she has made that clear every step of the way in her campaign. And the other part that I thought was crucial here is that she doesn't want to focus on her race, and she doesn't want to focus on her gender. And I don't think the rest of America wants to focus on those two factors either. I think the American people want to elect somebody who is competent, somebody who has substance, and somebody who has good character. Whether that be a black woman or not should not even be part of the question. Americans want somebody who can govern effectively. And I think Kamala Harris has proved that she will be able to do that. So I really like that she didn't focus on this. I really like that we haven't heard much of this from her campaign at all, because her being a black woman really doesn't matter as long as she can do the job effectively. So let's go ahead and move on. Kind of in that same vein, the Hallie Jackson, the interviewer here, asks whether or not sexism is playing a role in this election.
I ask because to implement the agenda that you want to implement, you have to win first. You have to win the White House. And right now there is a big gender gap in this race. Fewer men support you right now than they did President Biden. Some of your allies have suggested there's sexism at play. I wonder, do you think there is sexism at play here?
Let me just tell you something. You've come to my events, and you will see there are men and women at those events, whether it be small events or events with 10,000 people. So the experience that I am having is one in which it is clear that regardless of someone's gender, they want to know that their president has a plan to lower cost, that their president has a plan to secure America in the context of our position around the world. They want a president of the United States who honors our military, who understands the importance of America's leadership around international rules and norms. And that is regardless of gender.
So
and that is how I will lead.
Do you not see sexism as a factor in this race at all?
I don't think of it that way. My challenge is the challenge of making sure I can talk with and listen to as many voters as possible and earn their vote. And I will never assume that anyone in our country should elect a leader based on their gender or their race. Instead, that leader needs to earn the vote based on substance.
Now, again, I think that this is the perfect answer to this particular question. I think it is important that we aren't focusing on things like sexism. Even if it does exist, what good does it do Kamala Harris to try to point that out and call it out? I think it just makes her look weak, and maybe it is a part of this election cycle, but it's not important to Kamala Harris. And I think that that is super important. If you guys remember back to Hillary Clinton's campaign, I think the sexism talk was a very prominent piece of that election cycle, and I think it diverted people's attention away from more important topics. And the other thing that Kamala Harris said here, which I really like, which should be how every single presidential candidate approaches things, is that she wants to earn people's votes. And she's going to do that based on substance, based on good character. That is the exact right attitude to have for somebody who wants to be the next president of the United States. She should be out there trying to earn the vote of each and every American. That is how these races are won, and that's how we should expect our candidates to approach these races. But let's go ahead and move on to this question about whether or not she would give any concessions based around reproductive rights.
So is a question of pragmatism then, what concessions would be on the table? Religious exemptions, for example, is that something that you would consider?
I don't think we should be making concessions when we're talking about a fundamental freedom to make decisions about your own body.
To Republicans like, for example, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, who would back something like this on a Democratic agenda if, in fact, Republicans control Congress, would you offer them an olive branch, or is that off the table? Is that not an option for you?
I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals, because we can go on with a variety of scenarios. Let's just start with a fundamental fact. A basic freedom has been taken from the women of America. The freedom to make decisions about their own body. And that cannot be negotiable, which is that we need to put back in the protections of Roe v. Wade. And that is it.
But what if you can't do that? What if you can't get that passed and you want to save lives in Florida and in Texas and in Georgia? What do you do at that point?
I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole with you right now. Because
it's a question that's out there, because it's not a guarantee that Democrats will win control of Congress.
Well, I'm doing everything I can to make sure that we do. On this issue, I think that what is clear to me is whether someone is... I was just with one of the leaders, and I think opinion leaders in the Republican Party, Liz Cheney, who as she has stated publicly and has expressed her private feelings. She said it on stage yesterday. She is pro-life. But she also understands the pain and the tragedy that has happened since Donald Trump allowed Roe v. Wade to be overturned. So that's my point about what is non-negotiable. It has to be that we agree that it is so fundamental that we allow women the ability with their doctor, if they choose talking with their faith leader, to be able to make these decisions and not have the government tell her what to do.
So I think she walked that fine line pretty well. This is a tough question. And when the interviewer is talking about concessions for, like, religious exemptions, I don't even know exactly what she's referring to. People aren't being forced to have abortions. If you don't want to have an abortion, don't have an abortion. But I think Kamala Harris is taking the exact right stance here. And I think it is the way that most Americans look at this issue, that being able to have the right to choose is a fundamental right that deserves protection. We wouldn't look at any of our other rights, like free speech or our gun rights, as a non-fundamental right. It is a fundamental right to be able to make the choices that you want to make, especially when it comes to family planning. And I think that she backed that up with a qualifier by saying that we need to reestablish the protections that were afforded by Roe v. Wade. And I think that's exactly how most Americans think about this issue. More than 60% of Americans think that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. And they know that this crazy world that Donald Trump has spun up about women getting abortions after the baby is born is just ludicrous. And that we should trust the women to make the decision that is right for them, and we can move forward comfortably knowing that women aren't just out there murdering their babies in the 9th month. So I think this is the right stance to take here. I think it is a firm stance with a qualifier. And I do think that this is how most Americans think about this issue. This is a fundamental right that was ripped away by Donald Trump appointing those 3 Supreme Court justices. And, now women today are living with fewer rights than their moms and their grandparents. And that is a damn shame. But I wanted to look at one last question here, where she is asked whether or not she would consider pardoning Donald Trump. Let's see what she had to say.
If you win, it is entirely possible that the federal court cases against the former president will continue on. He is, of course, facing those felony charges. Would you consider, if you win and he's convicted, a pardon for former President Trump?
I'm not going to get into those hypotheticals. I'm focused on the next 14 days.
But do you believe, is there any part of you that subscribes to the argument that has been made in the past that a pardon could help bring America together, could help unify the country and move on?
Let me tell you what's going to help us move on. I get elected president of the United States.
Now, I'm not going to lie. I don't really love this answer, but I understand why somebody in Kamala Harris's shoes would give this answer. But Donald Trump does not deserve a pardon. And even if she did pardon Donald Trump, do you really think that would buy her any good grace with the MAGA universe? I think not. We are divided right now, and I think whether or not Donald Trump gets pardoned or not would not make a difference on there. But we should not be setting a precedent where some of the most powerful people in our country, somebody like Donald Trump, can just get pardoned if he tries to overturn a free and fair election. People like Donald Trump need to be held accountable for the laws that they broke. He tried to subvert our democracy by literally trying to overturn a free and fair election. In no world can I think of where Donald Trump should be let off the hook for that. These people need to be held accountable for the things that they have done. And I think that this is the way that most Americans look at this issue as well. They don't want our presidents to be above the law. They don't want our presidents to be able to mess with our elections and then just walk free. That is a ludicrous proposition. So I think that I would have loved to hear Kamala Harris answer this with a firm no, that I will not pardon Donald Trump. But I guess I can understand why she would say she's not going to get into this. It's just attention that she doesn't want to bring to herself by the MAGA universe if she were to answer this in the wrong way. So I think it's really important, guys, that we remember Kamala Harris is a positive option. She may not be the perfect candidate. She may not have all of the perfect policies. You may not agree with all of her policies. But we know that Kamala Harris has pretty good character. We know that she has served her communities for nearly her entire life. She knows what it means to serve others. And she loves this country. She has served in so many roles where she has been able to prove that, right? So when we compare her to somebody like Donald Trump, the choice should be clear. Even if you do not agree with her in every single case, she is not the person who has tried to overturn our free and fair election. She is not the person who tried to subvert our democracy. And she is not the one promising to go after her political enemies if she is elected. So even if you don't agree, it's still important to recognize that she is the better candidate. She is a much better person than Donald Trump could ever dream to be. And she would do a much better job serving this country as President of the United States. So these are the things that we need to remember when we go vote this November. But I'll leave it there. If you guys got anything out of this video, please remember to smash that like button and subscribe. Maybe share it with a friend or two. I'd very much appreciate that. If you want to see Donald Trump's epic meltdown in his recent interview, go ahead and watch that video on the screen now. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the next one.